So in 1950, this group of rural farmers and business leaders, they had a problem. The problem was that while telephone service was available in the big cities and in small towns, the big phone company of the day would not extend their infrastructure out to their rural areas. So they worked together to solve this problem. They formed a telephone cooperative. You know, they had to invest their own money, and some of them took out personal mortgages, and they made it happen. You know, but they took this risk not for future potential gain, financial gain. It was all about getting a critical communication service to their rural areas and to be a part of technology as it's progressing. And you know, this really hasn't changed today. Obviously, it's not telephones we're talking about anymore, but it's effective internet access. And it still boils down to getting critical services out to those that need it, no matter where they live. This cooperative philosophy, that is, working together to create and provide a service rather than an orientation to profit, on shared values rather than share value, really lends itself very well when the economics are tough. I mean, if there's money to be made, for-profit businesses will do it, and that's great. But in rural America, where population densities are low and construction costs are high, it's co-ops really that are moving the needle on broadband availability. So quite often I hear South Korea held up as an example of phenomenal internet access, and I'm sure it's true. But keep in mind, there are 27,000 people per square mile in Seoul, South Korea. I mean, heck, if you're that dense, you may as well just steal your neighbor's Wi-Fi, right? Problem solved. But in Beltrami County, that number is 7. So clearly the economics are a little different and the technical challenges are not quite on par. But don't get me wrong, I don't bring that up as an excuse of why it's tough, why we can't do it. Actually, I just mean it means that we need to think harder and we need to embrace creative philosophies like cooperatives to solve this problem. You know, while the density, those 7 people per square mile in Beltrami County is less, you know, they need the internet as much as their urban counterparts. And actually, I would argue that they need it more. They need it more because they rely on things like telehealth, that internet-enabled healthcare service that can be delivered no matter where you live, your proximity to a healthcare institution. Or how about education? For education, the sum of human knowledge really lives out there on the web somewhere, right? And for job opportunities and economic development, the internet not only connects people to opportunities, in a large part creates those very opportunities. And even government and participation in democracy now has internet as a component of that. So to step you back a little bit, the Communications Act of 1934 really built the foundation of telephone regulation and rules of governance. And within that regulation was this philosophy that was carved into U.S. policy called universal service. And it recognized that urban and rural, we all benefit if we're all connected and we all can communicate. As a result of that policy and resulting programs that they initiated, telephones went from 40% in the 1930s to nearly everywhere, regardless of location. So it can be done. This philosophy does work. Now, 62 years later, the 1996 Telecom Act again reaffirmed our country's belief in this philosophy of universal service. And actually, it made it stronger by expanding it to include internet access. You know, there's a young man, his name is Costa Grammatis. He founded an organization called ahumanright.org. And it's a fabulous organization. You should check it out. But their goal is to get internet for everyone. They think it's that important across the globe. But he has a kind of a fun, interesting twist on a famous proverb. He says, "Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and you feed him for a lifetime. But give the man the internet, and he can teach himself how to fish, or anything else he wants to know. Not to mention he can binge watch Game of Thrones. But, you know, that's not hardly the point today. So if we agree that having effective internet access is critically important to everyone, especially in rural areas, then how do we build a network to connect everybody? What technology should we use? How do we pay for such a network? And finally, what future are we trying to build this network for? Well, to get at that, I want you to go back with me a little bit and think about, how do you connect to the internet? Do you remember this sound? Wait for it. You're all loving that, right? Fond memories. Oh, yeah, that meant you were screaming along at 14.4 or 28.8 kilobits per second. Just hang on, right? But to put that in perspective, our gigabit service that we offer on our fiber network is 70,000 times faster than those early modems. It may not always feel like it, but it's true. And to that point, you know, your internet experience, whether it was that early dial-up experience, the early dreaded dial-up, or it's that mass of dusty cables that's behind your computer at your house or your business, or maybe today it's Wi-Fi, right, how you connect. Throughout all of those internet experiences, it's been your internet service provider that has been the throttle kind of to your internet experience. Well, now with gigabit-type services, that's no longer the case. And in fact, it can be that, unless your computer is relatively new, that gigabit service may be faster than that network connection in your computer, or your Wi-Fi service, or even that distant website that's trying to send you information. And you know what? I think that's exactly how it should be. Internet service providers should not be the determiner of what your capabilities are. You know, what's fast enough? What's good enough for you? What are you capable of? In fact, it's quite the opposite. We should be the enabler of whatever you can dream up today or in the future. Yet today, policymakers and ISPs alike, they're sitting around trying to decide what's good enough for you, what's fast enough. And they do it a lot of times, setting the bar really low for economic reasons. You know, they're trying to leverage their existing older infrastructure and not state-of-the-art technologies. It's short-term solutions they're thinking of, and we just can't think that way. So let's take a moment and talk about the different types of network technologies that can be used to connect you to the internet. There really are three different types of ways that communications can travel between you and the internet. There is data can be transferred via electricity over a copper wire. Data can be transferred via radio waves and a wireless connection. And finally, data can be transmitted by way of light over a fiber optic connection. So first, let's talk about copper. Now, there's two types of copper connections that are typically used in infrastructure today. One is called DSL, you're probably familiar. And DSL uses twisted pairs of copper wires to transmit that data. The other copper connection that is quite prevalent is coax networks, typically from the cable operators. Both of these copper technologies are decades old. But they've served us well, right? They've really provided us that initial experience with the internet. But unfortunately, both copper technologies suffer from signal loss, distance limitations, and speed limitations. And if you think about it, although they keep making progress, you know, how many more bits you can squeeze down that copper wire, this technology really, using copper for communications, dates back all the way to 1876 when Alexander Graham Bell invented the internet. Sorry, he wishes he invented the internet. Invented the telephone. That would have been awesome. So what about radio waves? Now, radio waves, meaning a wireless connection, are very prevalent, right? There's lots of wireless technologies. One is satellite. You hear about satellite internet. Unfortunately, satellite internet it's really only used in rural areas where there isn't a wired infrastructure to take advantage of, mainly because typically it's slow, it's a little more expensive. And if you think about it, that satellite you're trying to beam up to is 22,000 miles away. So it's no wonder that speeds suffer, particularly upload speeds, as well as the responsiveness, or what we would call latency, really suffers with satellite. But how about the other type of wireless, the one that you're really thinking of? Is probably in your pocket right now, right? Is cellular. That technology whether you're talking 3G or 4G, LTE, or in the next few years, 5G. That technology has really revolutionized the internet experience, bringing mobility, really cool devices, and a tremendous number of applications. But keep in mind, when you think about wireless and what can that wireless radio wave type connection deliver for you, that wireless connection is really only wireless between your handset and the nearest tower. From that point on in the network, especially today as capacities increase, those networks depend on fiber. Fiber optic networks connect most of the towers now and certainly will in the future. So wireless, like copper, has challenges with speed and capacity, and although, like copper, they're improving those all the time, ultimately they still suffer from capacity and speed limitations. So let's talk about fiber optic networks. As you probably know, these networks leverage fine hair-like fibers of glass, right? And across those glass fibers transmits light. And those beams of light can travel great distances securely, reliably, and actually they use less power. The other real advantage of fiber optic networks is that it can be a symmetric service, meaning that your upload speeds and experience can be every bit as fast as your download speeds. And this is critical. This is a big deal because if you think about your internet experience, downloading is consuming. Whereas uploading, that's producing, that's innovating, that's contributing content. So our networks really have to be able to provide that great upload experience for those innovators, for those producers. So really, if you think about it, if you're going to build a network for the future, fiber optic networks are really the only technology choice. Now on the cost side, in the next 10 years, the FCC is going to allocate $50 billion to improve infrastructure in the United States. And that sounds great. However, unfortunately, they're allowing that investment to be made on existing, aging infrastructure, only barely moving the needle in terms of speeds and capabilities. They're not building for the future. They're not demanding that it be built for the future. You know, again, it's not for regulators to decide what's good enough. It shouldn't be. What's fast enough. However, I've heard legislators, the very legislators that are responsible for our state and national broadband policies, I've heard them say things like, well, you know, I've got 6 meg down and 1 meg up, and that's good enough for me, and I do a little web browsing, and that's great. You know, and I talked to my neighbor, and they thought that was fast enough too. And that can't be how we decide our policy. That can't be how we dream of the future. We need to think bigger. So now when I think of thinking big, I think of Sir Arthur C. Clarke. He was a radar specialist with the Royal Air Force in World War II. He also was a mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, kind of a futurist. But you may know him best as the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which he wrote in 1968. He also had a little sense of humor. He would say, the best proof that there is intelligent life in outer space is the fact that it never came here. So I like that one. In a 1974 interview, Arthur C. Clarke almost perfectly described the internet, nearly 20 years before it was a reality. He talked about this thing like a console that you would have in your house, he imagined. And it would have a TV-like screen, and it would have a keyboard. And all of this would have some connection so that you could get at information, whether you're talking theater reservations or bank statements. But what was most interesting and compelling about his vision is the impact that he thought it would have for all of us. He said, and I'll quote, "We'll take it as much for granted as we take the telephone. And we won't have to be stuck in the cities," he said, his words, not mine. "We can live out in the country or wherever we like and carry on complete interaction." You know, it's visionaries like Arthur C. Clarke and others like him that prove that to really demonstrate real progress, we have to think out of the box. We have to think big. He said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Well, you know, this can be magic if we do it right. If we think to the future instead of the past, if we think big instead of incrementally, this can happen. But I think we need to expect fiber networks. We need to expect gigabit speeds and beyond. Let's not settle. We can do this if there is the will, like our founders had at our cooperative. The dollars are there if we invest them the right way, on the right technology, and for the right reasons. Let's not just get by. Let's think big so that we enable those that follow to dream of whatever's next. And let's do it for everyone. Thank you.